Story 1. I cared for my brother for 3 years who had end-stage renal failure. He was a non-compliant patient, and I often had to remind him to eat right, take his medications, and bathe. After a while, I had to clean him up when he soiled himself, take him to the hospital several times a week, and transport him to dialysis. In the end, I had to lift him from the floor when he fell, which was often. One day while lifting him, I heard a pop and immediately felt excruciating pain. I had developed a microfracture in my hip from overexertion. The next time he fell, I implored emergency medical services to help him. I had no choice. When I visited, he begged me to bring him home, but I couldn't. It broke my heart to hear him beg to leave. He passed away 8 months after he arrived. I couldn't even speak for a week. Story 2. When I was a child and my dad started hitting me, I realized none of the adults in my life were going to protect me. I told my mom and she wouldn't believe me. The next day, I told my teacher because we had just talked about inappropriate touch the week before. She looked me in the eye and called me a liar. I stopped trusting adults completely. I was 9 years old. Story 3. Watching my dad one afternoon around sunset, sitting on a bench in our backyard with our new fishing rods, practicing his casting for an upcoming fishing trip my brother, and I knew he wouldn't make it to. Cancer is terrible. Story 4. Opening up to someone, loving with all your heart, only to see them pull away bit by bit and never knowing why. To anyone who is going through something similar, go ahead and listen to Ballerina from Voila. Story 5. Got cancer at 27. 1 year in, I discovered my husband, whom I met when I was 14 and had 2 sons with, had a full-blown relationship with one of my best girlfriends. That had been going on for a year while she pretended to be my close friend during the worst time of my life, so she could attend my children's birthdays and get closer to my husband. Still recovering 9 years later. Story 6. My grandmother raised me. My dad died of a sudden heart attack when I was 8. My mom never got over it and started drinking, so my grandmother, who was 74 at the time, took over caring for me and my little brother. She broke her hip when she was in her late 90s, and she had to be put in a nursing home. I would go visit her. By then, she had started living in the past. She knew me, but she thought I was still in school and would ask why my brother wasn't home, what we wanted for supper, things like that. One day, I went to see her, and she didn't recognize me or know who I was, and she didn't speak. That was the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching day of my life. That broke me completely. I went to my car and cried like a baby for a long time. She died at the age of 103, but that was the day I lost her. I didn't cry at her funeral. Story 7. My mom died when I was a senior in high school. It all seemed very surreal, like she had never actually left, since everything of hers was still in the house where she had left it. At her funeral, after hearing my brother and sister speak, make morbid jokes, as our family tends to do, and just generally do the normal funeral stuff, it finally hit me. It had been several days since she had passed, but it just hit me all at once like a bag of bricks that I would never hear her voice again. She would never be there to nag me when I needed to take out the trash, clean my room, do my homework, or the million other things that she had to constantly remind me to do. That was the moment that I broke down and started sobbing. I hadn't shed a tear up until that point. Maybe it was shock, I don't know. In that moment, I realized that I now lived in a different world. One where I would have to finish growing up without the aid of my mother. Story 8. 2 things. Losing my dad suddenly to a heart attack less than a month before my 21st birthday. I completely missed the chance to bond and develop an adult relationship with my dad. After that, I made sure that I really treasured and built a strong relationship with my mother. We were already best friends, but I didn't take her for granted anymore. I would go over for lunch or dinner once or twice a week, and we would have endless laughs, and I would always tell her how much I loved and appreciated her. 2 months out from my 29th birthday, my mom suddenly died from a stroke. This hit me hard. To lose my main pillar of strength in life was an emotional blow I still haven't recovered from. Since then, I've inherited and managed to buy my own place, a wonderful advantage at 31. But inside, I have never felt more hollow. If it weren't for my wonderful fiancé, I would honestly question the point in going on. She is the kindest person I know and is a big part of my motivation for continuing and excelling in life. I used to be such a joyful and unbridled personality, completely insulated from the harm that life can bring upon you. I miss that version of me. I'm still a good person, I still extract joy from a lot of what I do in life, but I still feel like parts of me died along with my parents. Thanks for asking this question and allowing me to put into words what I've been through. Story 9. Losing my dad. I'm not super emotional on the topic for the most part. I saw the cancer consume him from the inside, going from a hearty 300 pounds to under 100 pounds in 10 months. But he never complained until the last days. But I always had someone to call about the dumbest things, laugh about my mom's antics, just wholesome moments. I have had a difficult life in recent years, and he is someone who would not have only helped me, talk to me, but also would have helped find a solution. Story 10. Made a deal with several friends to meet up on a certain future date, time, and place. One of the keys was that we couldn't talk about it again, just had to trust that no matter what happened in the intervening years, we'd be there. I made up special personalized gifts for each person and waited in the foggy park for 2 hours later than the agreed time. Finally, I broke down and called one of the couples, and not only were they not coming, they had told the other people they wouldn't be able to make it, so the other couples decided not to come either. And nobody told me. Forget those guys. Story 11. My mother telling me she preferred her girlfriend over me because, and I quote, she was not a pain in her ass. This was at 1 a.m., when I came home after a day in college and working 2 shifts to help her pay the mortgage. I left the next day. I was 18. Story 12. When my husband and I got pregnant for the first time, we were beyond excited, planning the future. Then we went to our 10-week appointment and first ultrasound to be told there wasn't a heartbeat. A repeat ultrasound 2 weeks later showed it had never developed a neural pole, which turns into the brain and spinal column or cardiac activity of any sort, that it had basically just stopped developing for no reason they could tell, and that a miscarriage was inevitable. My husband is a very stoic man, usually doesn't show a ton of emotion. Him crying with me about broke my heart. To end the comment on a better note, though, that was late October and early November last year. We got pregnant again fairly quickly, and we're 33 weeks with a healthy pregnancy so far. Story 13. Confronting my ex about the rumors I had heard that she had cheated on me. When I asked her the question and she took a second to respond, I felt like my entire chest collapsed, realizing that everything we had built up until that point was a lie and that I could never trust her again. Story 14. Realizing my dad actually is the father and more that I grew up begging to have. I just wasn't worth the time and effort, but his girlfriend's kids and grandkids are. They've gotten a lifetime of someone that unconditionally loves them, helps them, travels to see them, calls them regularly, has in-jokes with them, makes them laugh, buys them gifts that they've wanted because he knows who they are and the things they like, tells them stories, and lets them in and learn about who he is. Meanwhile, I've begged for him to let me be a part of his life since I was 4. Only just clicked this year he's got everything and everyone he needs without me. I'm just an obligation and the only one that's fighting to have a relationship. Story 15. Little brother almost killed himself because of the hatred of others. He's one of my best friends and would never hurt a fly. He was only 12. Other kids at school would beat up on him almost daily. He was pantsed multiple times and called names. There were too many incidents to list that amounted to various physical and sexual assaults. Teachers did nothing. Mom could only do so much. He tried hanging himself. He had slid a note under my door, saying he was sorry. It was only by luck that I woke up wanting water at 3 in the morning. I stepped on the note and rushed to his room where he was hanging in his closet. He had only been hanging maybe a minute and was just losing consciousness. He fought me as I took him down, bawling. He was so small and so innocent. I can't, to this day, imagine the kind of person it takes to dehumanize a kid like that. I don't care how old you are. It shattered my heart to pieces to see him like that. I felt so helpless. He's doing so much better these days. I'm glad we got out of that place, that he got help, that he learned to love himself, and I am so glad I got thirsty that night. I can't even imagine. Story 16. Losing my younger brother, who I had been fighting with for months. Still hurts, and it never will stop hurting. Tell your loved ones you love them every day. You never know what is around the corner. Story 17. When my 13-year-old told me his biological dad had been abusing him every weekend visit since he was 3, I was devastated. He is 17 now and has never seen him since the day he told me. After a lot of therapy, he's in a great place now, but my heart broke into a million pieces that day. Story 18. My cat died when I was 12. I found her in the morning in a bath of urine, completely limp on her favorite pillow. She was 20 years old, struggled to walk, stand, or even sit straight. The evening before I found her, she was dragging herself around the house as if searching for me. She laid on my lap for hours, and when I had to go to bed, she wouldn't let go. She knew what was coming and wanted to stay with me. I know this is not as bad as some other stories I read. She was just a cat after all, but I never really recovered. Her name was Indy, by the way. Story 19. Losing my childhood pet hit me hard. She was my constant companion through so many ups and downs, and when she passed, it felt like a piece of my heart went with her. It's tough to fill that void, but I cherish the memories we made together. Story 20. My mom died when I was 15 after a 10-year battle with recurring oral cancer. She never smoked a day in her life either, just got unlucky. Her death was incredibly painful. However, there was something that happened a couple of years prior that I think broke my heart first. A bit of backstory. My mom was a children's librarian. She also worked at a children's bookstore for a while, and one of her favorite parts of her job was getting to do story times for the kids where she'd read to them and they'd do activities she prepared. For as long as I knew her, she'd read to me and my sister, sung us lullabies, and was always there for advice or encouragement or any other reason we had for talking with her. Words are a very important part of my life and were always central in my perception of her and the way she showed love. Then they had to remove her tongue. When she first told us, and once it had registered, that I would likely never hear her voice again, I completely broke down. That said, she did still manage to speak some. I strongly believe there was nothing that could have stopped her from that, but it was nowhere close to how she could before. She actually made some audio recordings for us the night before her surgery. Personal messages, my favorite lullaby that she used to sing to me, and a couple of my and my sister's favorite picture books that she used to read for us. I still have them to this day, and I am forever grateful they exist. Story 21. When my parents didn't believe me when I told them I was raped as a boy, and as I left the room, I overheard them say to each other that I was just looking for attention. Story 22. The news of my nephew's murder. I've experienced a lot of death throughout my time on this planet, but that news broke me in ways I will likely never recover from. He would have been 7 this year. Story 23. Love is not enough. My dad took his life a few years ago. He was a beloved member of the community and had 9 kids who adored him. You cannot convince someone to stay because you love them. It isn't enough. Story 24. When my ex told me she and her family make fun of me behind my back, I can take other people making fun of me, but knowing that my girlfriend was a part of it, it makes you feel a specific type of alone. Story 25. There was a story in the news earlier this year about a middle-aged single dad who had a heart attack and died in his home. They found him a couple of weeks later with his toddler son, who starved to death lying next to him. Even typing this out is making me tear up. Story 26. My husband suffered a severe traumatic brain injury over 10 years ago. He was not at fault in any way. Our children were 8 and 10 years old at the time, and I was in my early 30s. After about 7 months in hospitals, I brought my husband home as a diagnosed minimally conscious state patient who requires around-the-clock care. While I do have nursing, it is not consistent, so I fill in several 12-hour shifts a week and have done so for 10 years. Our children are grown now. They are healthy and well-rounded adults, for which I am abundantly grateful. Losing my husband was the greatest heartache of my life so far. He is here, but not really. He loved me deeply and fully, and we were best friends. I fully appreciated him in every way. He was in all ways my person, and I was his. Not one thing in my life has brought me so much happiness and joy as meeting him and falling in love. We would have been married for 13 years by the time he was injured, and while we are still technically married, it is hard to feel that way. Our relationship now is one of caregiver and patient. Our kids have moved out for work and college and to live their own lives, which I encouraged because I have not wanted to drag their lives down with our tragedy. They need to build their own futures, and that has been my driving force from the moment the fog of initial shock lifted after my husband's injury. But if I am not unhappy and sad, I am perpetually a small trigger from crying at any moment, and I was not a crier before this all happened. The unhappiness is now an integral part of me. Sadness is twisted into my core like bindweed around a willow. My 30s are long gone. He is fairly stable because he is cared for so well in his own home, so he will likely live another 10 years or longer, and that means my 40s will also be devoted to his care. I cannot put him into an institution because doing so would wreck me completely. The internal conflict of seeing my life go away day by day spent caring for his body, the years falling away to never be regained while also wanting to give him the best care possible, is something I cannot allow myself to think about. It is too painful. I still love this man so much. I miss. I feel guilt for even mourning my 30s. I feel guilt for being surprised by how much my face has aged. I am stuck in 2014 when the injury happened. I could write so much more, but this is already too long.